Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Thank you for joining us. We are just 2 days away from the New Hampshire primary. Voters will cast their ballots this Tuesday. Our latest CBS News Battleground Tracker shows a tight race there. Senator Bernie Sanders is leading the field with 29% of likely voter support. Pete Buttigieg is polling at 25%. They're followed by Senator Elizabeth Warren, former Vice President Joe Biden, and Senator Amy Klobuchar. The other candidates register 2% or less or are not on the ballot. New Hampshire comes on the heels of the Iowa caucuses last week. You'll recall the results out of that contest were delayed. The Iowa Democratic Party announced quality checks of the election data before releasing any final numbers. At the end of the day, Buttigieg and Sanders were neck and neck. Buttigieg right now has a slight lead in state delegates, while Sanders had an edge when it came to final choice support. The New Hampshire primary was a main talking point on Face the Nation. Here's some of what Senator Sanders and Pete Buttigieg had to say about the upcoming contest.
We are running all over the state. We're talking to as many people as we can. We're talking about what our agenda is, which is an agenda that speaks for the working families of this country, an agenda that is prepared to take on the powerful special interests that have so much influence over the economic and political life of our country. And by the way, we're going to contrast our views with Mayor Buttigieg. And one of the areas of contrast, to be honest with you, is that last count, he has about 40 billionaires who are contributing to his campaign, the heads of the CEOs of the large pharmaceutical industries, the insurance companies, and so forth.
Well, I've never hesitated to stand up to industry. We sued the pharmaceutical industry when opioid makers ravaged our community, and I'm campaigning right now for higher taxes for the wealthy and for corporations to finally have to pay their fair share. And my campaign has been built from the grassroots. We have hundreds of thousands of supporters, most of whom went on PeteForAmerica.com and chipped in a few bucks because they share this vision that we have for the future. You know, being the mayor of South Bend, Indiana is not an establishment powerhouse. We're here because this message, this vision that I'm offering is connecting with voters of all backgrounds. And at a time like this, if somebody is ready to help us put together the campaign that's going to defeat Donald Trump, then I welcome that support.
CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is in New Hampshire. Caitlin, great to see you. How are we seeing the candidates make their final pitches to voters there in New Hampshire?
Hi, Elaine. Well, New Hampshire voters are telling us that they're not taking any cues from Iowa, but when you look at the polling and when you look at the movement here on the ground, it certainly feels like Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg are leading in this contest. We're here at a Pete Buttigieg event right now in Nashua. The line was out the door in 27-degree weather. You can feel that kind of energy for him, feeling the energy also for Bernie Sanders. But it's Joe Biden who is really lowering expectations for himself here in New Hampshire after a fourth-place finish in Iowa. In the debate the other night here in New Hampshire, he said that, look, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are from neighboring states. Joe Biden took a gut punch in Iowa, and he expects he might take one again in New Hampshire. But he's really focusing his ire on former Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Take a listen to what he had to say just yesterday.
And so we want to compare records. It's easy to do. I get it. And he's a good guy. He's a great mayor. But guess what? He was a mayor. He's a good guy. But the idea of passing a budget as mayor of a town the size of Manchester and managing $900 billion with less than 1% fraud or abuse, picking up his city and thousands of cities across the country, is ridiculous. Oh, come on, man. You think this guy's not a Barack Obama?
So you can hear there, Elaine, really going after Pete Buttigieg. That comes after he released a digital ad here in New Hampshire comparing his record with the former mayor and downplaying Buttigieg's experience. the reason that he's been going after him is because he's trailing behind him, and they're kind of focused on similar voters. The more moderate lane of the party, Pete Buttigieg has been arguing for a fresh face to kind of turn the page. Joe Biden has been arguing for experience. But here in New Hampshire, it seems like Pete Buttigieg has the edge. The Biden campaign is looking at all of this in totality. So they say even though they could take a hit in Iowa and New Hampshire, they're looking to Nevada and South Carolina, where the electorate is much more diverse, a place that they can make their play. But it's also important to know that here in New Hampshire, about 42% of voters here are undeclared voters. That means they're not affiliated with the party, and they can participate in the Democratic primary. And those are the types of voters that Pete Buttigieg is focused on, as well as Biden and Sanders.
Well, Pete Buttigieg and Senator Bernie Sanders had a close finish in Iowa this week. You asked Buttigieg directly about his rival and whether he had any concerns about Sanders labeling himself as a Democratic socialist. Let's take a listen to part of his response.
I am concerned about Senator Sanders' approach. And actually, to me, it's less about the labels, because labels get thrown around all the time. To me, it's about a politics that says it's my way or the highway, that if you don't agree with us completely, if you're not all the way out with us on the edge of this spectrum, then you don't count, and we don't want your help. I believe this is a moment where we've got to bring as many people as possible into this American majority.
So, Caitlin, should we expect more direct attacks like this in the coming weeks?
Good afternoon.
I think so. We're only 2 days away from the New Hampshire primary, and we saw in the debate and in events here over the weekend that Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg have been really focused on each other as well. Bernie Sanders has been also going after Buttigieg for the way in which he's raising money. Bernie Sanders likes to talk about the grassroots organization that he's built up, focused on grassroots donors. He's been going after Pete Buttigieg for accepting larger contributions. Pete Buttigieg, however, has been talking about this idea that actually Joe Biden brought up on the campaign trail recently, that everybody who will run, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, everybody who will run on that ticket in November would be tagged with the Democratic Socialist label. That's something that Joe Biden has been talking about. We've seen a lot of more establishment-oriented Democrats raising concerns about Bernie Sanders' candidacy, given that he has been surging. Pete Buttigieg is focusing on that, but it looks like the two of them coming out of Iowa in that photo finish also appear to be the top rivals here in New Hampshire, representing two different visions for the Democratic Party.
Well, Caitlin, besides Buttigieg and Sanders, only 3 other candidates netted delegates after Iowa. Of those campaigns that did not, could New Hampshire be a make-or-break moment for them?
I think that we're going to be looking at a few candidates here that we haven't been talking about. Elizabeth Warren, who did get delegates from Iowa, and Amy Klobuchar, who we see surging in a couple of polls recently. Those are two, obviously, women candidates who have been talking about gender on the campaign trail. But I'm looking at Elizabeth Warren because over the summer when I was following her here in New Hampshire, she was really enjoying strong support. And we've seen her support come down. She's, of course, from neighboring Massachusetts. There are going to be questions if she can't do well here, how she could expand her base of support. However, if she continues to outpace Joe Biden, I think that could help her stay in this race. And the same thing goes for Amy Klobuchar, who had been campaigning in Iowa as someone who could win in the Midwest. Well, she placed lower down than she expected to in Iowa. Can she make the case for continuing on in other more diverse states? I think that's the big question. And the question remains also for Joe Biden, who has been saying that he can win back those voters that supported Donald Trump in 2016, that he can win back places like Iowa. Well, if he didn't do well there, that also raises questions about his kind of support that he's been campaigning on.
Right. Well, one candidate not publicly focusing on these early states is former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. I asked his state's director, Dan Cannon, about this strategy on Red and Blue last week. Take a listen.
Every single candidate, the top 6 that made it through Iowa at this point, spent 859 collective trips into that state in the last year. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is in North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida. Mike realized we had to get there early into those battleground states, defend and make an argument on Democratic terms against the president, and build a campaign infrastructure that could take him on in the fall. It's the only campaign capable of doing that, and that's what we've built so far to the state.
It's really intriguing to think about this alternate path, possibly. What is Bloomberg's viable path to the nomination?
It's really interesting to consider how Bloomberg is doing because he's not competing in Iowa and New Hampshire. And a lot of supporters of his say that's a good thing, considering the chaos that was the Iowa caucus. He's been focused on those battleground states, really building up an organization, and he's been attracting a lot of attention, not only from voters, but from the president himself. He's been very focused on President Trump and his ads. He's not attacking any other Democrats in this race. So he's someone that could maybe benefit at this stage in the campaign where you have Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders all going after each other. Does that enable Michael Bloomberg, who has the best financed operation in this race because he's financing it himself, does that allow him to remain above the fray? The Super Tuesday contest will be critical for him, but you can't watch TV here or in any battleground state or any state across the country, really, without seeing an ad for Michael Bloomberg. The big question is, now that the Democrats have expanded or changed the requirements to make the next debate in Nevada next week, that could allow Bloomberg to make that debate stage for the first time. Could that influence his decision, his standing in this race? We haven't seen him in the way that we've seen other candidates. Yes, he's got a lot of money. Yes, he's focused on those battleground states. Yes, he's getting attention from Donald Trump. But when he's on that debate stage, how does that change the dynamic? And that is certainly something that is interesting to many of his rivals here in New Hampshire.
Finally, Caitlin, President Trump will hold a rally Monday in Manchester, New Hampshire. Can you remind us how critical the state is in the general election?
Yeah, we've seen this counter-programming from Donald Trump really following these candidates wherever they are. We saw him have a big rally in Iowa just before the caucuses, and we're going to see him have another big rally here in New Hampshire the night before the primary. Donald Trump did well in the primary in New Hampshire, narrowly lost the state in the general election, and he's hoping to flip places like New Hampshire in his favor. And he's also trying to, as we go through these contests, show that while he doesn't have any real significant challenges for the nomination and that he enjoys a lot of the comforts of incumbency, he is trying to make the case that he is a force to be reckoned with as an incumbent, and especially raising concern among some Democratic voters about that big headline that he received in Washington this week that he was acquitted by the Senate. I've talked to voters here who are concerned that that might embolden Donald Trump. Candidates running for president on the Democratic side are trying to argue that the verdict will be rendered on the president in November, even if they didn't get the result that they wanted from the impeachment proceedings.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns in Nashua, New Hampshire. Caitlin, I will see you very soon. Thank you so much.
Can't wait, Elaine. See you soon.